Let me ask you something that might genuinely surprise you. Have you ever noticed that some people in their late 70s and early 80s seem to move through life with an energy and sharpness that others their age simply do not have? They walk without holding on to walls. They remember names, appointments, conversations. They laugh easily, sleep well, and wake up with something that looks remarkably like purpose. They are not necessarily the ones who had the easiest lives or the best genetics. They are not all taking special supplements or following complicated medical protocols, but something about the way they live is profoundly different from the majority of their peers. Research into healthy aging has identified a small but consistent group of adults between 75 and 85 who maintain their physical strength, mental sharpness, emotional well-being, and independence far longer than average. And what separates them from everyone else is not luck, and it is not purely biology. It is a set of specific daily habits, 6 of them, that the vast majority of seniors have quietly stopped doing, often without realizing the cost of stopping. Today, you are going to discover all 6 of those habits, explained clearly and honestly with real examples of what they look like in practice and what they make possible. Whether you are 75, 82, or caring for someone who is, these habits are not out of reach. They are available to you starting today. Stay until the end, because one of these habits may be the missing piece that helps you stay healthy and independent for years to come. If you enjoy practical health and longevity tips for seniors, subscribe and turn on notifications. It only takes a moment and helps you stay informed every week. Before we get to the 6 habits, it is worth understanding honestly why so many adults begin to decline more rapidly after 75 duels, because the reasons are not simply what most people assume. The common belief is that the deterioration many seniors experience in their late 70s and 80s is inevitable, that the body simply wears out, that the brain inevitably slows, that weakness, fatigue, isolation, and dependence are the natural destination of a long life, and that very little can be done to alter that trajectory once a certain age has been reached. But here is what the science of aging actually shows, and this is the part that most people never hear clearly stated. A significant portion of what looks like aging, the loss of muscle, the decline in balance, the fading of memory, the shrinking social world, the low energy, the growing dependence on others for basic tasks, is not caused primarily by the passage of time. It is caused by what stops happening as time passes. Think of the human body as a garden that is regularly tended, watered, turned, exposed to sunlight, given the right nutrients, continues to produce and to thrive well into its later seasons. A garden that is left alone, even in good soil, begins to overgrow, to lose vitality, to produce less. The soil has not changed. The capacity is still there. But without consistent, deliberate attention, the output diminishes year by year until the garden no longer resembles what it once was. This is what happens to the human body and mind when the habits that sustain them are gradually abandoned. Muscle loss, which doctors call sarcopenia, accelerates when resistance and movement disappear from daily life. Balance deteriorates when the stabilizing muscles that protect against falls are no longer challenged. Memory and cognitive sharpness decline faster when the brain is no longer regularly stimulated with new information, meaningful conversation, and mental challenge. Mood and resilience suffer when social connection shrinks and purpose fades from the daily routine. The fears that accompany this process are deeply real. The fear of falling, and what a fall at 78 means for independence. The fear of forgetting, of losing not just names and appointments, but the sense of self that memory helps sustain. The fear of becoming a burden, of needing others for tasks that were once effortless. These fears are valid, but they are not foregone conclusions. And the 6 habits you are about to discover represent the most practical and powerful response to each of them. The first habit that distinguishes the healthiest seniors in their late 70s and 80s is one that sounds almost too simple. They keep moving every single day with intention, not necessarily intensely, not in ways that would impress anyone at a gymnasium, but they move with purpose and consistency in a way that the majority of their peers have stopped doing. A morning walk of 20 to 30 minutes, a gentle exercise routine performed at home several times a week, gardening that involves bending, lifting, and reaching, dancing even slowly, even in a kitchen. The specific form matters less than the consistency and the intention behind it. Here is why this matters so profoundly after 75. Every day that the body moves, it receives a signal that says, function is required here. Keep the muscles ready, keep the joints lubricated, maintain the balance mechanisms, keep the cardiovascular system efficient. The body remarkably responds to this signal at any age. Studies involving adults well into their 80s have shown measurable improvements in muscle strength, walking speed, and balance within weeks of beginning a consistent movement practice. What happens when that signal stops being sent, when movement becomes minimal and sedentary time dominates the day, is that the body begins a quiet process of decommissioning. Muscles shrink, joint flexibility reduces. The small stabilizing muscles that keep a person upright and safe on uneven ground weaken, and the cascade that follows, reduced confidence, reduced activity, reduced strength, increased fall risk, can unfold with surprising speed. The seniors who remain vital and independent into their 80s have almost universally found a form of movement they genuinely enjoy or find meaningful enough to return to every day. Finding that form and protecting it as a non-negotiable part of daily life is where this habit begins. The second habit is one that most seniors stop without ever making a conscious decision to stop. It is the habit of strength, specifically, deliberately maintaining and challenging the muscles of the body through some form of resistance activity. After 75, the body loses muscle mass at an accelerating rate without consistent resistance exercise. This is not a minor cosmetic concern. Muscle is the engine of independence. It is what allows a person to rise from a chair without assistance, to carry their own bags, to climb stairs, to catch themselves when they stumble. When muscle mass falls below a certain threshold, the activities of daily life begin to require assistance. And once that assistance begins, the cycle of declining independence can be very difficult to reverse. Most seniors stop strength-related activity for completely understandable reasons. They associate weight training with gyms and young people. They worry about injury. They feel that their body is no longer capable of building or maintaining strength. And here is what most people never realize. Every one of these concerns, while understandable, is contradicted by the evidence. The body retains the ability to respond to resistance exercise and build meaningful muscle well into the 80s. The exercises required do not need to involve heavy weights or gym equipment. Chair-based exercises, resistance bands, body weight movements like standing from a seated position repeatedly, these create the stimulus the body needs. 2 or 3 short sessions per week of deliberate resistance activity, progressed gradually, can preserve the muscle mass and functional strength that separates independence from dependence in the later years of life. The 1% of seniors who remain physically capable well into their 80s have almost always maintained some form of this habit, even if they never called it strength training. Let me tell you about Miriam Kostadinova. Miriam is 79 years old, a former primary school art teacher from a mid-sized town in Bulgaria who moved to England in her 50s to be closer to her daughter's family. Miriam had always been a gentle, creative woman, someone who found joy in color and texture and the quiet pleasure of making things with her hands. But in the 2 years leading up to her 79th birthday, something had shifted in a way that frightened her deeply. She had stopped going to her weekly watercolor group, not because she no longer loved painting, but because the walk to the community center had started to feel uncertain. Her balance was unreliable enough that uneven pavements made her anxious. She had started holding her daughter's arm on any outing that involved more than a few minutes of walking. She was sleeping poorly, waking at 3 or 4 in the morning and lying awake with a low, unfamiliar anxiety that she could not name. Her daughter noticed that Miriam had lost weight she could not afford to lose, and that she seemed smaller somehow, not just physically, but in the way she occupied her own life. Miriam's GP, at a thorough review appointment, identified significant muscle weakness in her legs and a balance assessment that placed her at high fall risk. Rather than simply noting this and moving on, the GP referred Miriam to a community falls prevention program that combined gentle strength exercises with balance training and a supported walking group. Miriam attended reluctantly. She sat at the back for the first 2 sessions and did the exercises with minimal effort, certain they would make no difference. By the 8th week, she had walked to the community center twice on her own. By the 12th week, she had returned to her watercolor group. Her sleep had improved markedly. She was waking once rather than 3 times, and returning to sleep more easily. Her leg strength, reassessed at 3 months, had improved by 22%. Her blood pressure, which had been elevated, had come down from 152/91 to 138/84. But none of those numbers captured what mattered most. Miriam's daughter described it simply. Her mother had come back. Miriam herself said quietly, at the end of her final program session, "I thought I was disappearing. I did not know I could find my way back." The third habit of the seniors who age most successfully is one that is deeply underestimated in conversations about physical health, and it is this: they never stop learning. This does not mean formal education, though some do pursue that. It means maintaining a consistent and genuine engagement with new information, new skills, and new ideas. A crossword puzzle completed every morning. A language being slowly, imperfectly, joyfully learned through an app or a community class. A book club where opinions are shared and challenged. A grandchild's interest in technology being genuinely explored rather than dismissed. A new recipe being attempted once a week. A documentary watched not for entertainment, but for curiosity. The brain, like muscle, responds to the stimulus it receives. When the brain is consistently challenged with new material, things it does not already know how to do automatically, it maintains a degree of neural plasticity, which simply means the ability of brain cells to form new connections and adapt. Research from institutions including Harvard Medical School and University College London has shown that cognitively active older adults show slower rates of memory decline and maintain executive function, the ability to plan, organize, and make decisions, significantly longer than those whose daily mental life has become largely routine. And here is what most people never realize: the type of mental activity matters less than the challenge it presents. Watching the same television programs you have always watched does not challenge the brain in the same way as learning something genuinely new. The discomfort of not knowing, of being a beginner, of working something out slowly, that is exactly the feeling that accompanies the neural activity that protects cognitive health. Lean into that discomfort. It is the brain doing its most important work. The fourth habit is one that the research on longevity has identified consistently across populations and cultures, and it is perhaps the one that modern life makes most difficult to protect: the habit of genuine, regular, face-to-face human connection. Not social media, not text messages, though these have value, not the passive companionship of a television in the background. Actual human presence, conversation, laughter, shared meals, the physical reality of other people who know you and whom you know in return. Loneliness among adults over 75 is one of the most significant and underaddressed health crises of our time. Research published in Perspectives on Psychological Science found that chronic loneliness carries a health risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, not metaphorically, but in terms of measurable impact on cardiovascular health, immune function, and mortality. Isolated older adults have higher rates of dementia, higher rates of depression, faster physical decline, and significantly shorter life expectancy than socially connected peers of equivalent health status. The seniors who remain vital and happy into their 80s have almost universally maintained meaningful social connections through community groups, religious communities, family routines, friendship groups that are actively tended rather than passively hoped for. They make plans, they show up, they initiate, they understand, consciously or instinctively, that connection is not a luxury or a comfort. It is a biological necessity with measurable consequences when it is absent. If your social world has shrunk, if the weekly coffee, the Tuesday lunch, the regular phone call has quietly disappeared from your routine, rebuilding it is not just a matter of emotional well-being. It is one of the most powerful things you can do for your physical health and your longevity. Let's address the myths directly, because they stand between too many older adults and the habits that could genuinely change the quality of their remaining years. The most damaging myth about aging after 75 is simply this: decline is inevitable, and very little that I do now will make a meaningful difference to how I age. My body is what it is. My brain is what it is. The trajectory is set. This belief, while understandable given how aging is often represented in culture and sometimes even in medical consultations, is contradicted by a growing and compelling body of research. Studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine, Aging Cell, and numerous geriatric medicine journals have demonstrated consistently that lifestyle interventions, exercise, nutrition, social connection, cognitive engagement, sleep quality, and stress management produce measurable and meaningful improvements in health outcomes for adults well into their 80s and beyond. The important distinction that research is increasingly making is between chronological age, the number of years lived, and biological age, which reflects the actual functional state of the body's cells, tissues, and systems. These two numbers can diverge significantly based on lifestyle. Adults who maintain the habits described in this video consistently show biological markers of aging that are meaningfully younger than their chronological age would suggest. Decline is not simply caused by age. It is caused in large part by the accumulation of lifestyle factors that either protect or erode health over time. Many of those factors remain within your influence at 75, at 80, and beyond. The ceiling on what is possible at this stage of life is higher than almost anyone tells you. The fifth habit may be the simplest on this list, and it is also the one most consistently overlooked in conversations about healthy aging. Adequate, restorative sleep, protected deliberately, and taken seriously as a health priority. Sleep is not rest in the passive sense. During sleep, the brain performs critical housekeeping, clearing metabolic waste products, including amyloid plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. The immune system strengthens and repairs. Muscle tissue rebuilds from the work of the previous day. Hormones that regulate appetite, mood, blood sugar, and cardiovascular function are restored to balance. Growth hormone, which supports tissue repair at any age, is released primarily during deep sleep. After 75, sleep architecture changes in ways that make deep, restorative sleep harder to achieve without deliberate effort. Sleep becomes lighter. The transition to waking happens more easily and more frequently. Many older adults begin to accept fragmented, unrefreshing sleep as simply what sleep looks like now. And in doing so, they deprive their bodies and brains of one of the most powerful restorative processes available. The seniors who age most successfully treat sleep with the same intentionality they bring to exercise and nutrition. They maintain consistent sleep and wake times even on weekends. They protect the hour before bed from bright light, stimulating content, and difficult conversations. They keep their bedroom cool, dark, and quiet. They limit caffeine after midday. And if sleep problems persist despite these efforts, they raise it with their doctor rather than simply accepting it as an inevitable part of being their age. 7 to 8 hours of sleep remains the target for adults in their late 70s and 80s, not because it is always achievable, but because it is worth consistently working toward. The sixth and final habit is the one that the research on longevity and healthy aging has returned to again and again across cultures, across continents, and across decades of study. It is the habit that is hardest to quantify, but most consistently present in the lives of those who remain vital, happy, and connected well into their 80s and beyond. That habit is purpose, a clear, felt sense of why today matters and what you are still here to contribute. Purpose does not require grand ambitions or remarkable achievements. It lives in the grandmother who tends her family's history and tells their stories, in the retired teacher who volunteers at a literacy program once a week, in the man who keeps a garden that neighbors stop to admire, in the woman who calls her friend every Thursday morning, not because it is scheduled, but because she genuinely looks forward to it and knows her friend does too. In any person who wakes in the morning with something to move toward. Research from the Rush University Medical Center found that adults who reported a strong sense of purpose lived longer and maintained better cognitive function over time than those who reported feeling that their life lacked meaning. Purpose appears to buffer against the physiological effects of stress, maintain motivation for health-sustaining behaviors, and provide the social engagement that isolation destroys. The seniors who stop finding purpose, who retire from work, and then gradually retire from everything else as well, from roles, from contributions, from the sense of being needed, age faster. Not because purpose is magic, but because its absence removes the motivations and connections that sustain almost every other healthy habit on this list. You exercise because you want to be well enough for something. You stay connected because you have people to be connected to. You keep learning because life still has things to offer, and you still have things to offer back. If purpose has faded from your daily life, finding it again is not a luxury. It is a health intervention. Let me tell you about Arthur Pemberton. Arthur is 81 years old, a retired civil engineer from a town in the English Midlands, a quiet, self-contained man who had always been more comfortable solving practical problems than talking about his feelings. When his wife of 53 years passed away 3 years ago, Arthur did not collapse outwardly. He cooked his own meals. He kept the house tidy. He answered his son's weekly phone calls with reassuring brevity, but inside, and in ways that eventually became visible, Arthur had stopped. He had stopped walking, the daily route he and his wife had shared for 20 years. He had stopped attending the local history group he had been a member of for over a decade. He had stopped sleeping properly, waking at 2 or 3 in the morning and simply lying in the dark until it was late enough to get up. He lost 8 kilograms over 18 months. His son, visiting for a weekend, found a man who seemed to be going through the motions of living rather than actually doing it. Arthur's GP, at a health check requested by his son, found blood pressure elevated at 162 over 96, mild cognitive test scores that had declined from previous results, and a man who agreed to try a befriending service and a local men's walking group with the quiet resignation of someone who expected nothing from either. What happened next surprised even Arthur's son. The walking group met twice a week and included men of similar age with similar histories. Within a month, Arthur was attending every session. Within 2 months, he had resumed the local history group. He began sleeping through to 5 or 5:30 most nights. His blood pressure came down to 141 over 85 at his 3-month review. He had regained 4 of the 8 kilograms he had lost, and he had started a small research project documenting the history of a local Victorian waterworks that gave his mornings a shape and a reason. Arthur said very little about all of this to his son, but at Christmas, almost without context, he said, "I forgot for a while that there were still things worth doing. I remember now." Here is what a day built around these 6 habits can look like for an adult between 75 and 85. Not a perfect day, but a realistic and achievable one. Wake between 7 and 7:30, ideally at the same time each morning. Before getting out of bed, spend 2 or 3 minutes in gentle movement, ankle circles, shoulder rolls, deep breathing, to prepare your joints and your cardiovascular system for the transition to upright. Drink a glass of water immediately because overnight dehydration is common and affects energy, joint comfort, and mental clarity. After a light breakfast that includes protein, eggs, yogurt, or a small portion of fish, take your morning walk. Even 20 minutes at a comfortable pace on familiar ground delivers cardiovascular benefit, mood support, and the kind of gentle joint movement that reduces morning stiffness. If mobility is limited, a seated exercise routine performed at home for 15 to 20 minutes achieves similar benefit. Mid-morning is an excellent time for mental engagement, a puzzle, a chapter of a challenging book, a language learning session, a piece of writing, a creative project. 30 to 45 minutes of genuine cognitive challenge, at whatever level is appropriate for you, is a meaningful contribution to brain health. Lunch should include vegetables, protein, and healthy fat. Eat slowly and without distraction where possible. A 10-minute rest after lunch is not laziness. It is physiologically sensible for adults in this age group, and a brief rest can restore afternoon energy without disrupting nighttime sleep if it is kept short. Afternoon is the natural time for social connection, a phone call to a friend or family member, a community group, a visit, or a simple shared activity with a neighbor. If you have limited mobility, a regular scheduled phone or video call with someone who matters to you serves much of the same biological function as in-person contact. An early evening walk of 15 minutes, if possible, supports digestion and blood sugar management after dinner. Dinner should be moderate in size. A heavy meal late in the evening disrupts sleep quality in older adults. By 8:30 or 9, begin winding down. Lower light levels, reduce screen stimulation, perhaps read or listen to something calming. Aim to be in bed by 10 at the same time each night. If you feel tired earlier than this, rest, but try not to nap beyond 20 minutes in the afternoon, as longer naps can fragment nighttime sleep. If you need extra support with any of these habits, a conversation with your GP or a community health worker can connect you with programs and resources designed specifically for adults in this age group. A gentle but important reminder before we close. Every person over 75 carries a unique health picture, and that picture matters when making changes to daily routine. If you have significant arthritis, heart disease, osteoporosis, a recent fall or fracture, or any condition that affects your balance or mobility, please do not begin a new movement or exercise routine without first discussing it with your doctor or physiotherapist. The habits described here are appropriate for the vast majority of adults in this age group, but the pace, intensity, and specific approach may need to be adapted to your individual situation. If you take medications for blood pressure, diabetes, heart conditions, or bone health, some lifestyle changes, particularly increased physical activity, can affect how those medications work. This is generally a positive development, but it needs to be monitored by your healthcare team. Make changes gradually. One new habit at a time, introduced gently and built slowly, is far more sustainable and far safer than attempting to transform everything at once. The goal is a direction, not a dramatic overnight overhaul. Talk to your personal doctor before making significant changes to your health routine. That conversation is the right beginning. Here is the most important thing to take away from everything you have heard today. Healthy aging is not a matter of fortune reserved for the genetically lucky few. It is, to a meaningful and evidence-supported degree, the result of consistent daily choices. Choices that remain available to you at 75, at 80, and beyond. Moving every day. Maintaining your strength deliberately, never stopping to learn. Protecting your human connections, taking sleep seriously, and finding again, a sense of purpose that gives your days direction and meaning. These are the 6 habits that distinguish the 1% of seniors who remain vital, independent, sharp, and genuinely alive to their own lives well into their 80s. They are not secret or complicated. They are simply consistent. Miriam Kostadinova walked back to her watercolor group when she had believed that door was closing forever. Arthur Pemberton found that there were still things worth doing when he had quietly stopped believing that was true. Their bodies and minds responded because they were given the right invitation. Your future health is not determined by your age alone. Small daily choices still matter, perhaps now more than ever.